everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those who are new here, go hit subscribe, and I talk about blogging and freelancing and everything really to do with being self-employed. I'll link to my blog below, which is the Blog Lancer, and it covers all of those topics. And today I'm going to tackle something that lots of you have asked about, which is kind of my journey into getting into freelance writing and any tips for kind of pitching and trying to get byline. So the first question lots of you have asked me before is kind of about my qualification. I don't have a journalism degree, and that's something that hasn't really held me back, that people really haven't asked me about. However, I'm not suggesting not to get a qualification. It's something I'd really like to do at one point, but I have an English degree, and then I was a teacher, and now I'm a writer. So I wouldn't necessarily worry if you don't have a qualification at all. However, if you kind of do want to get the qualification, which I know I do eventually, National Union of Journalists have a short course that is relatively inexpensive. I think it's about £500, but there's lots of different modules that have to add it up, and it can be done at home. So that's something that I definitely want to go into and try and do. But I'm just wanting to make clear that if you haven't got a journalism degree, that doesn't mean you can't start sending emails and you can't start coming up with story ideas. The second question somebody asked was kind of any kind of places to start to kind of make the jump, and this is something I was constantly asking people before I started writing features and being a journalist. It's something that I just wanted somebody to tell me, oh, you know, this is a good place to start here, this is a good publication to start. But people just kept saying, no, you just need to get out there, you need to come up with story ideas, and you need to keep sending them. And that is so true, and I wish I'd have done it so much earlier on, but I just felt like I didn't really have the confidence to do so. But definitely there is no kind of place to start. One of my very first commissions was for The Independent, but they just really liked the story and it was relevant to my blog, which I'll talk about how to use your blog in a second, and therefore they accepted it pretty much as soon as I pitched it. And I think it's really important to know you don't kind of necessarily have to start at the bottom. Some of you might think, okay, I'll start by writing for free, and what I would say with that, if you really want to build a portfolio, there's nothing wrong-ish with doing that, but I would really focus on sites that would at least be recognisable. So it really annoys me when people launch like a brand new website magazine, and I do use inverted commas because often it's something that is really just a basic blog, but they're kind of terming it as a magazine and asking for contributors. They've got really few followers, and they'll say, you know, you can put it on your CV. You have to think, you need something on your CV that's going to be recognisable. You know, a random website with 14 Twitter followers is not going to be necessarily recognisable. So I think if you're going to write for free, focus your efforts on recognisable sites. So for example, if you have a chronic illness like me, I did write once or twice for the Mighty. In fact, I just wrote once because I thought then I can say I've written for them. I don't agree with the fact they don't pay their contributors when they're so big, but just writing them for them once to kind of get that byline was another thing I could add to my journal portfolio. Similarly, Huffington Post, I wouldn't advise people writing for now, but about 3-4 years ago I was approached by them to write for them, and I did a couple of pieces, and then I got annoyed because I think they should pay writers as well, but it was a byline. So I'd say if you're going to write for free, kind of get in, get the byline, and kind of get out. Don't keep doing it. Another alternative might be to kind of write for like non-profits, charities. At least they'd be recognisable, and you'd be obviously contributing to a good cause as well. The biggest thing that has really helped me is to just pour through magazines and online websites, making a note of which ones look like they accept contributors. And the way I kind of figured that out is, you know, you'll often see a contributors page at the start. Well, that's an obvious way of figuring it out, but you can also kind of see, you know, if they give individual name credits and then that name isn't listed in the staff, you know, bit at the front, then they're obviously a freelancer. So you can get a feel for which publications use freelancers. Some websites will have kind of like a contributors page, but often they won't. And then I would just keep reading and really trying to get a feel for what content they like, what type of things. Is it listicles? Is it real life? Is it product roundups? And then just start coming up with ideas. And when I say ideas, I mean lots of ideas. I sometimes in the middle of the night, I'm like, I've got 5 more ideas. It's really hard to keep not churning out, but you know, to keep coming up with different concepts, and everything's going to have been done before. So make sure you've googled, you know, have they done this type of article before. Okay, so let's have a look at how you'd actually approach, Fiona's asked kind of how you would actually approach and do a pitch. And this is a formula I actually first learned on another website, Janet Murray, who does a lot about businesses pitching to the press. I really liked kind of her structure, and it's something that I always try and follow in my head. So the first thing is to kind of be able to sum it up in the subject. So pitch idea or story idea or feature idea or whatever, colon, and then what the thing actually is. If you can't sum it up in that subject header, it's not going to be a good article, so you need to go back and think of a way to. So for example, if I was writing about gluten-free birthday cakes, you know, it might story idea, the gluten-free birthday cakes you need to try, or something like that. So that would be my first suggestion. Kind of divide it into two parts. The first part is all about why this is a good story and why it's a good story for that publication, and that's what people don't often do, I think. You know, why is it good for that publication? So I might start by talking about the story, and I used to, like I said, I used to be a teacher, and I would say to the kids whenever they would write, why should I care? Why is it relevant to me? And they'd be like, well, it's just a piece of writing. But I'd say, you know, if they're doing an article, why should I care? And so it needs to be something that's timely, but it also needs to be something relevant. So is it timely? For example, Dynamo has Crohn's disease, and he was just on television yesterday. So it was really timely for me to send some pictures out about Crohn's disease because it's in the news. But with those kinds of pictures, you need to be kind of ready to turn it around really quickly. So the first thing is it's something that's really timely. You can also think in terms of seasons, like it's Christmas, it's summer, so that's timely. So, and then the second thing is it relevant. So why is it relevant to the audience? So that's why you need to actually read the magazines and figure out how it matches. So for example, I did some travel writing, and it was quite a quirky publication, and it was kind of like different. So I pitched an idea of Stratford, but without any references to Shakespeare. So what you could do if you just hated Shakespeare at school. So I mentioned that was kind of different because they were looking for different takes on travel. It was for couples, and couples liked, you know, weekend visits. And so I talked about how it was relevant to their audience and the kind of topics. And so why it would make a good feature. In that first paragraph, you're going to kind of want to just summarise briefly the main point of the story. And in the second paragraph, I would just explain why you are the right person to write it. So you have to think of how many freelancers there are. I'm just going to check the other question. How many freelancers there are, how many people they've got in staff. So I always think if it's something very generic, like 10 tips for drinking more water, unless you are a water expert, which I'm not sure if that's a thing, that's something that they could get a staff person to turn around in 30 minutes, couldn't they? So you want to pitch something that is so good but is so unique that they can't just give it to any staff member, and that you are going to have that expert knowledge in to make it unique to you. So yeah, so Fiona asked kind of what background you highlight so in your pitch. So in that bit where I'm talking about why I'm the best person to write it, I'll just give you a very brief overview of who I write for. So that's why it is good to kind of have a few publications to mention. If you've just wrote for a publication once, you can just say, you know, I've previously written for X, X and X, that's fine. So you don't need to necessarily write for them 20 times to get a byline. And you can get something called Journo Portfolio, which I link below, and you can upload your links, and I will just put that at the bottom of an email. So if you want to look at my work, here's an example. And I'll try and tweak that each month. And if I know that it's kind of something, say if this was for a travel website, I knew I hadn't done that much travel, but I made sure that I tweaked my Journo portfolio so there was a bit of travel on there, so they could kind of see. And yeah, and that's kind of what I would do. I'd make clear, someone's asked before about if you'd mention your blog, and if it was relevant. So I've been doing some pictures about Crohn's disease, and I've written a book on Crohn's disease, and I have a blog on Crohn's disease, so I think it's relevant to mention. But on the whole, I don't tend to mention it now. I can mention other sites like the Independent and Metro and so on, because I think obviously that sounds a little bit more impressive. But I would keep it really, really short, and then just say thank you. So a paragraph on why you're the best person, and then a paragraph on why the story is right for that publication. Someone asked me about how you follow up, so I leave it a week or so. I never follow up on a Monday or a Friday. I'll follow up maybe on a Tuesday and just forward the email on and just say, hi, I'm really sorry, I just wanted to check if this was for you. what you can do, if something's really timely, then I might kind of go back to them the next day and just say, really sorry, but obviously because it's timely, I just wanted to check before I pitch elsewhere. But by timely, it means, you know, people aren't going to be interested next week. So not necessarily a seasonal thing, but like the Dynamo thing, the press attention was there, so they needed something quickly. Oh, I think I've answered them all. Yeah, so someone's asked about where to find work, and I don't think I've been lucky. I think I've just had the persistence. I do appreciate that I've written for a lot of places in perhaps a short amount of time, but I actually think there are many advantages to being a freelancer at the moment. The staff are being cut left, right and centre, and I was recently at an event and I was listening to, I won't say which magazine, but a magazine I'd love to write for, and I have gone on to write for, and they were saying they only had 4 members of staff, and this is a magazine that I've read for ages, and you would just think that they wouldn't even be interested in freelancers, and she said they had 4 members of staff. So I don't think people appreciate how short places are for content, and if you think of online, they are constantly churning things around at such a pace that it's often, you know, like it's just on and on and on and on and on, so they always need content. So I actually think finding places for work is easier than ever. I think start with what you read, start with what you know. In terms of having a blog yourself, I think it would be good to start with that niche. So for example, I blog about gluten-free, so in my first pitches I just focused on gluten-free because that was something that's unique to me, so they just can't get a staff member to write it. Well, they might be able to, but less likely, and I could show my expertise in. So if you've got a niche that you write about, start there and think about how you could kind of be an expert voice. But as soon as I kind of established myself, I would then go back to the same publications and pitch different ideas, because once they know you, then they're more likely to trust you. So now I've written about everything from Dawson's Creek to, that was my favourite article actually, to pets and travel. Start with what you know, and then as soon as you kind of have it in, try to diversify, because I think it's really, really important. Which is why sometimes if something's perhaps low paid or free, maybe we'll stick with low paid. Say something's low paid but it's a reputable site. I think sometimes if they're really open to what you're allowed to write about, and you can get a few credits on completely different things, that can be really, really helpful to show that you're a versatile writer. And I think as well, I don't think people appreciate how many times people just don't reply. So the worst that can happen is somebody doesn't reply. So I think I'm really persistent, and as soon as you've written for a publication, go back and say, here's my next ideas. Maybe not immediately, but what I'll do is as soon as I've sent them over, if it's a publication that I know are looking for regular content, I'll just say, do you mind if I pitch you some more ideas? And more often than not, because they know you and you're already set up on their payment system, they're happy to kind of keep rolling. And I think there's only one magazine or one publication that I've only written once for. On the whole, I keep going back and they keep going back to me, which is really positive. But don't be afraid to keep going back and keep sending ideas, and if they don't like your first idea, they might like your second idea and your third idea. And I've had them rejected in like either no replies or just like not for me or don't get this at all. But then I've gone to another publication, they've been like, yeah, I really like it. So don't be afraid to kind of be rejected. Oh yeah, so obviously I've talked about freelance journalism because that makes up most of my time, but freelance content writing can also be a thing that you might want to get into, and I find opportunities on there on Twitter. But a good thing to start with, if you work with kind of brands that are quite small, obviously not like Urban Decay or something, but if it's like a smallish brand, you might want to go and you can see they've got a blog on their site but it's not been updated for a while. It can be worth emailing them and saying, you know, would you like to work together on some content? I can write for your blog. I think if you've already written a post for them on your blog, you can kind of pitch them as a natural extension. And the other day I did some content on a brand site and I said, well, why don't we do something on my site as well, and kind of pitched it as a package thing, and that was what worked well. So you could start with speaking to brands that you know. LinkedIn obviously is really effective as well, but because there are so many content writers out there, personally I think you'd be better off starting with brands you know and starting again with your kind of niche. So if you write about parenting, go to some parent brands. Don't think you can necessarily just turn your hand to everything. I think that's it. I'm going to turn this off now, and I guess I'll jump back on if I can think of any other questions, but otherwise I really hope this helped, and please hit subscribe. I'm loving this YouTube thing. I feel as if I'm one step away from Zoella territory. 160 subscribers, so there's only like 900 and I can't even figure out how many thousands to go till I hit 1 million. But I am really enjoying it, and it means the world to see people leaving comments and saying it helps them, because that's all I really want to do with my channel.